Hello, everyone in internet land. We have kind of rainy, cloudy weather. It's all good. For the two anagarkas here, this is quite a treat because they work very hard to imagine. Tisana has a lot of work. It's quite a big site. So for them, it's a very nice treat, nice break, and to see two young men who perceive silence and meditation as a lovely break as opposed to maybe a Grateful Dead concert. That's pretty cool, isn't it? So we're all grateful, really. So maybe getting back to that interesting question of I feel stuck and I want to have a more deep experience. So obviously in this case, the deep experience is absent and the sense of stuckness is present. What was presence ever absent? And you start to see what I'm pointing to. And it's very seductive, these deep experiences of meditation, and they're not irrelevant. But if it begins, it ends. And although they might be inspiring, if you're looking for something that began and ended, then still conditioned. So you go back to that. Yeah, but was presence ever absent? And that happens in the thinking mind. In meditation, you have a sense that I haven't been here or haven't been on the job, whatever it is. But I find if I ask that question, I notice that there is presence, there is silence, there's being, there's consciousness. It's always there. And getting to that is very subtle. That's one thing. It's a good candy. I took it too late, just to soothe my throat. Okay, there's that. So that takes you to sort of like the more enigmatic kind of statements or more subtle ways of thinking about this teaching. So the more obvious things about the Buddhist teaching are things like being a good person, not hurting people, being responsible, being generous, developing the crafts of livelihood and all of that. I think everyone here probably does that very, very well. Very good candy. Let me just finish that. So one of the teachings which I think many of us have heard, and I find quite interesting, is that rephrasing, just to remind you of the Four Noble Truths, Wompo Dun's, which was maybe, I think Wompo Dun is contemporary of Wompo Mun. Wompo Mun is our kind of granddaddy of our forest tradition. And he was a forest monk, one of the great ascetics of Thai forest tradition. He was a great influence on Ajahn Chah, although Ajahn Chah was only with him for a few days. But Luang Por is a different lifestyle. He was in a very, very busy city monastery, which was had a lot of ritual going on, very, very busy. So his life, like Luang Por Man's, was very much solitary, tudong, ascetic. They were constantly trying to make him an abbot of monasteries, and he'd constantly disappear. I think they chased him all over Thailand for years and years and years. So he's the kind of classic, what we call tudong monk, which is the kind of wandering ascetic tradition. Luang Por Dun, again, Dun, I think it's Luang Por Dun, would you pronounce that? He was right in the city, right in the heart of very, very busy monastery. And if you've been to Thailand, there are some pretty full-on monasteries with all kinds of markets around and so on. So this formulation comes from him. So it's a reformulation of the Four Noble Truths. So the mind going outside is the cause. The result of the mind going outside is suffering. The mind, knowing the mind, is the path. The result of the mind, knowing the mind, is the end of suffering. So he reformulates the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths, there is suffering, its cause, its end, and the path. There is suffering. That suffering has to be understood. There is the cause. Cause is attachment to craving. There is the cessation. That cessation has to be realized. That's by the letting go of craving. And there's the path, the Noble Eightfold Path. So Luang Pu Dun switches around. The mind going outside is the cause. The mind is the cause, and the result is suffering. And the mind knowing the mind is the path, and the result is the end of suffering. That's a very kind of direct and enigmatic way of talking about it. But this, to me, is absence ever present. Just seeing if you're listening. Is presence ever absent? Anyone's listening to me. Is presence ever absent? Is the mind knowing the mind? And how do you do that? You know, how do you do that? Well, when I ask you to just notice the silence after a thought, it's like this. Or when I ask you to listen to sound, but don't worry about the quality of sound, just listening, and you hear the silence. Or when I just say the word I. And it seems to me that's the movement of the mind knowing the mind, because it's not referring to the quality of your experience, it's referring to the knowing of the experience. And that is a whole different way of relating to sense experience. Because usually we're relating to sense experience oftentimes through the necessities of biological life and the attractions of the pleasant and the unpleasant, right? That's most sense experiences like that. Nothing wrong with that. So the feeling of depth is attractive, and the feeling of stuckness is unattractive. But then you're caught in that dualism, and that's the nature of sense pleasure and sense pain. There's nothing wrong with pleasure, and we're all going to prefer it to sense pain, right? I don't like painful knees or bad stomach or whatever, so it's obviously preferable, but it's not necessarily available. And if the only option I have is pleasure, and it's not available, then what? But there is another option. There is something available, and that's more enigmatic and less easy to notice, is that the knowing itself, the knowing of pleasure and pain. So in Buddhism, we have this sort of strange way of saying, we say that the pleasant is unsatisfactory. Only if only if you're referring to the transcendent. If you're referring to, if you say like that, so you'll hate, people will say, or people will misinterpret Buddhism, think everything is suffering, which will imply a pretty heavy nihilistic view of life. But that's a misinterpretation of everything, and a misinterpretation of the word dukkha. But what that sort of misrepresentation is about is that even the pleasant is unsatisfactory if you hang on to it. So if you hang on to a perception that I had a deep insight or I had a deep experience, then that creates a sense of self and time and birth and death and so on. Whereas is presence ever absent, the mind knowing the mind, it's like this. They're all pointing to the same thing. The kind of Advaita way of asking who's thinking, you have the same sense of presence. But why don't we trust that? I mean, it's not so hard to notice the silent mind, is it? Why don't we trust that? So I thought, and what came to mind was the You know, when I had hair, it's one of the great disappointments of my mother. Your mothers are like this, aren't they? Oh, you had such nice hair. So my mother's on. But so the Beatles were singing, all we were saying is give peace a chance. So why don't we give silence a chance? We don't give it a chance. You know, we prioritize thought, and we prioritize it so strongly that we forget that there's silence. So there's something about our conditioned mind that as soon as there's silence, we seem to want to fill it. You know, put the iPhone down, pick it up. Doesn't take long. And what is that? That's always this sort of restlessness of the mind going outside is the cause. Now, when you say it's the cause of suffering, then that sounds, the word dukkha, that doesn't, translated as suffering, doesn't really fit. And so the word dukkha that we have has this broad meaning. It certainly can mean a broken leg and Crohn's disease or whatever you want. It can mean that, but it can also mean that in terms of the liberation of the heart, any sense experience can't be where it's at. So it's unsatisfactory in that sense. And that's important to understand why we are kind of, that we're not, that isn't a teaching which is sort of heavy and nihilistic and unhappy. Like, I enjoy weaving, and I enjoy struggling with color, and I enjoy fiber, but I know it's not transcendent. I know it's suffering all the time because unsatisfactory in that sense. So living in the world and appreciating beauty, but also appreciating, but it's dualistic. So that dualism is no longer a hassle. It just is natural if one begins to contemplate where the real freedom of the heart is. And then actually beauty is more beautiful, because then when beauty comes into life, you say, wow, this is a peak experience. And then when it goes, of course, it's supposed to change. And you know that I always talk about that. Lompo Samedo quite often would say that to me. We'd be having a great Dharma discussion or something, and there'd be a sunrise. This is Viradhammo. This is a peak experience. And what he was pointing to was true. It was like, yeah, it's great, but it can't be great all the time. So then beauty or harmony or these, then there's gratitude. And when it's not there, there's patience. It's a whole different attitude. But what if we don't have that sense that there is something bigger than pleasure and pain? Then we're always in that dualism, pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain. So what is like the feeling of gratitude of having a refreshing meditation? Oh, thank you. And then the next meditation is absolute garbage. Oh, why not? You know, how could it be otherwise? Then you can see that's wisdom. And that's wisdom functioning. Oh, this is what a garbage meditation feels like. and then you're mindful of it. And the whole concept of garbage, of course, then falls away. It's just the way it is, because now you have refuge, you have a home, or whatever language kind of works for you in that way. I think most of us probably been practicing for 20 plus years, I think. Yeah, probably 15 years. Like kind of serious practice. And how many of us, when we first started, had a really kind of original mind, maybe, in the sense that we weren't jaded by good experience. That we had a sense of like, what would it be? Not naive, but not expecting anything, maybe. You know, innocence, that's the word. That's the word I want. Innocence, in that sense. And then you just do it, you know. Whatever your teacher says, okay, I'll do this. Boing. Wow. 10 years later, wow. It's just it's so heavy. So you pay for the Boeing. So coming back to innocence or purity, or not purity in a kind of moralistic way, not that, but just that sense, oh, it's like this. This is actually quite hard, because as soon as any technique, it's like this, oh, this will work. You're always trying to get something out of it. It's like this. So what can you say? Then it seems to me you encourage silence. Well, silence will do it. But why don't we give silence a chance? That's kind of most of it's habit, but as soon as the mind has nothing to do, and you can use your iPhone for that. Just like if you're into that kind of technology, just leave your iPhone in front of you for half an hour. Don't move it. Wow, this is renunciation. Oh, we laugh because it's true, isn't it? Profound. So that was fun, wasn't it? So let's just sit quietly for a while, but do contemplate that. Like as the mind starts to touch silence, can notice the mind going outside is the cause, and the mind knowing the mind. So maybe in referring to Tarek's question, what is remembering? Maybe right effort, right mindfulness, right samadhi. If you put it as a verb, I know it's terrible English, but nowing, or it's like this thing. And it's terrible English, but you can see the point of that. It's a dynamic thing. It's not like effort is like a chunk of halava or something like that. It's not a kind of a fixed thing. It's this dynamism of constantly remembering. Remembering is a good word for that. Remembering what? Well, it's like this. And then doing that again. And then trusting in that. And then noticing the mind going out to an object, out to thought, or to whatever it is, and oh, but it's like this. And then the mind knowing the mind. And you could see that's a very subtle kind of training. A training of doing. And you don't really achieve anything in that sense, because you're not looking for an experience, but you rather remember space and silence of awareness. So let's sit for 45 minutes, yeah? I won't give any instruction on this one.